and India Today is special. We are describing the budget of 2020 as a do-or-die budget for the Narendra Modi government. What are the challenges facing the government at the moment and what are the solutions? Joining us now, a very special guest, privileged to be joined by Nobel laureate and economist, Professor Abhijit Banerjee. Thank you very much, Professor Banerjee, for joining me. Various words are being used to describe the state of the economy. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman admits we are in a slowdown but says it's cyclical. Other economists are saying we are entering a recession. Some are calling it stagflation. How do you see the state of the economy at the moment?
Look, I've spent my life saying that GDP numbers are kind of sausage that you don't really want to look very much into. And these sort of, is it 4.8%, 3.7%, whatever. Arvind Subramaniam seems to think it might be even much lower.
Yes.
I don't know that nobody knows. The first order fact is no one knows, because essentially the informal sector, which is a very large part of our economy, what happens to it we don't pick up in any way. There's no data. This is all kind of imagined or made up data. Every 5 years we do a survey to adjust formal sector GDP with informal sector GDP, and when we do that we see what the state of the informal sector is. In between those rounds we are kind of just assigning a number to that sector proportional to the formal sector GDP. So all of this is a bit, so in that sense I'm one of these people who doesn't believe anything. When you say that India just went from 6.3% to 6.5%, I say, okay, fine. It's entirely subjective, I think, at that level.
What is clear is growth is declining for 6 consecutive quarters. Now, we can argue over the numbers, but it is declining. So
Absolutely.
Are you going to call it a slowdown, recession, stagflation? Because as we've seen last month, consumer price index has also gone up to over 7%.
Right. So I think that there are two pieces of bad news. One is inflation has returned. I don't know for how long, but I don't actually understand why. So I'll admit that I didn't expect inflation to return quite this fast, because crude oil prices are falling right now, and one of our big drivers of inflation is crude oil prices. So the inflation might actually moderate quite fast because the crude oil prices are going down. And then I think the growth has slowed. Every indicator that we have that I think is better measured, which is imports, exports, investment, all credit offtake, they all look dire. So I would say that it's clear that the economy has slowed substantially. Now, how much is slowed? That's what I said before, which is I don't tend to spend a lot of effort defending. Is it 4.1, 3.7, 4.8, -1? All of this is going to look similar at some level because we really don't have a data collection apparatus that tracks it well enough.
So we'll call it a slowdown.
Yeah, let's call it a slowdown.
And how do we, therefore, we are not calling it recession, stagnation, we are calling it a slowdown. How do you get out of a slowdown? Is it cyclical? Is it structural? And more importantly, how do we get out of it? Since your book is Good Economics for Hard Times, these are hard times. What's the good economic solution for hard times?
Well, I don't know that we know the diagnosis, so I think there's some dispute over it. My sense is that we have a demand problem. You look at the offtake of the vehicles and things like that, lumpy durables that people buy, white goods of different kinds. We seem to be in this state where the offtake of that has gone down. And that, I think, must be kind of seen as a key fact about the economy. That we're not buying, for example, our imports are also falling, and we're not buying a lot of these kind of expensive durables that families buy. That tends to be a sign that the family is a bit worried about their finances. They're holding back. The fact that the informal sector seems to be particularly affected, again, as I said, there's no data, but the one thing that you notice is that it's two-wheelers that have really crashed. And two-wheelers are where you think somebody whose small business is going well, that's where he puts his money. He's not putting his money. I suspect that that's a sign that the informal sector is kind of maybe tanking a little bit. So I think that all of that suggests to me that if I had to take a guess about what's wrong, I would say there's a demand shortage, typical Keynesian demand shortage, where people aren't buying and therefore people aren't selling. But if you're not selling, you're not making any money, you're also not buying.
In a sense, you hit the nub of the problem, the demand crunch and the consumption crisis at the moment. And many are attributing it to demonetization and GST as a kind of a double whammy. So how does one emerge out of it? There are two views. One is that this is the time for increased government spending. This is the time to try and find ways to increase the amount of money in people's pockets. The other view is that we've got to tighten our belts. At the end of the day, excessive government spending is not the solution.
So maybe I'm more in the first camp. I'm not sure that, I don't know what excessive is. I mean, look at when the US basically hits a real crisis in 2008, 9, 10. What does it do? It basically invents a term called quantitative easing, which actually means printing money and paying people for goods. And it emerges quickly out of the crisis. And in a sense, it's interesting because, Ben Bernanke, who was running the Fed at that time, was a Republican appointee and a traditionally conservative economist. But his first reaction is, right now we're all Keynesians, we're going to spend money. And I feel like if we really believe the diagnosis that we're going to demand a real demand crisis, I think spending money in the short run, you want to abandon the kind of the rules and make a good plan. What you really need is a good landing plan. So you want to not say that we're going to do an expansion, but an expansion that's going to be very focused and very clearly bounded. So we want to have a landing plan, go back to the normal fast. That's your way to assure both markets that it's not that suddenly the rupee is going to go to 150 or whatever to the dollar. It's going to settle down quickly, and at the same time, revive the economy.
So you're talking about fiscal stimulus.
Yes.
You believe this is the time to give that kind of a fiscal stimulus. You've got to pump in the money into the economy.
If I had to take a guess, you see, I think the one great problem of not having better data, we had really good quality. This is a moment where the government should notice that partly this conversation is going kind of all over the map because we don't actually have real data. The US had real data on consumer spending day by day. They knew exactly what fraction of the income people were spending, what they were doing. They knew exactly where it was hurting. Having reliable data is extremely useful. We don't have it.
There's a sense that we get anecdotally that the informal sector, the small, micro businesses are the ones who've been really hurting over the last couple of years, and that's widened inequalities. Jobs have been lost, businesses have shut down. At the bottom and the lower end of the pyramid, what does one do to revive a sense of confidence in them, give them a sort of leg up?
Well, I think that, again, I would say demand is where things really start is in demand. So I think one of the places where I think a lot of the mechanism has got stuck is in the infrastructure sector. The infrastructure sector is basically, extremely bruised by, I think, overbuilding. Typically, this is like a problem that's been there for the last 400 years. Overbuilding, you create real estate that nobody wants to buy. The banks that finance you are now bankrupt, and therefore they don't have the ability to lend to anybody. So infrastructure is so big that when it goes up, it pulls the economy up. When it goes down, it pulls the economy down. Infrastructure is also one place where it's one of the big links between kind of urban, prosperous India and rural India, because it's where, the people I often work with, who are young rural men and women, especially men, where do they find jobs? They find jobs they come to Delhi, they work on a housing project of some kind, and they sleep inside the building and for 6 months. They take some money, they go back to Darbhanga. This is a huge part of what links, the poorer eastern states with the rest of the country. And that's where, if you see the poverty reduction in states like Bihar and UP over the period 2005 to 2015, it's very impressive. And you have to wonder where it came from, since these states are very poor. A lot of this comes from migration earnings, and migration earnings are a lot to do with infrastructure. So I would say one of the things the government can do, if you want to get money in the hands of really poor people, who then buy in the informal sector, who buy these garments that are made, non-branded or kind of semi-branded garments, those people are going to be the people who buy are those people who work in the infrastructure. So infrastructure is a good place to spend, and our infrastructure certainly needs improvement.
In the last few months, the attempt has been made to target those at the top end, give corporate tax breaks as were given a few months ago, but it hasn't in a way revived investor confidence. You are among those who doesn't seem to believe that cutting corporate taxes is really the solution. Esther Duflo has even gone, your co-Nobel laureate has gone to the extent of saying, revive the wealth tax. Why do you do away with the wealth tax? Are you saying that this isn't the time to cut taxes, as some are calling for, rationalize taxes, put more money in people's pockets, the middle class and the upper classes, incentivize corporate India?
So there are two separate things. I think corporate India, and I think it's a little bit of a exaggeration to call, corporate India the middle class. And the middle class...
Yeah, middle class and corporate India.
I think corporate India is sitting on a bunch of cash. They're not investing. Why they're not investing? Because there is no demand. I would say if corporate India will take any tax cut you offer them, they'll never say no. But if you really want to revive their investment, you want to get the other side up. Now, the middle class is a little bit different, because I think that, for example, real estate and cars, if you want to have a demand for it, the middle classes are. So you may want to consider temporary tax breaks. I really think that the point I was making before about a landing plan, where you can have temporary tax breaks, which you absolutely insist you're going to take away. I think those are not necessarily bad things, because they induce people to, especially if they're tax breaks on, for example, buying, GST breaks on buying cars, GST breaks on, real estate tax cuts. I mean, those are, tax cuts on cement, on iron. These are ways in which you can get the real estate sector going again and the automotive sector going again. Those are not necessarily, so they rather than income tax cuts, I would do tax cuts on things we want people to buy.
Because many are saying there needs to be a complete drastic overhaul in GST. It's been much too complicated, it's cost far too much, and that's where small businesses are really hurting.
No, I don't...
I mean, it can't be done in the budget, probably by the GST Council, but you also agree that there needs to be a radical overhaul of GST, make it simplified?
Absolutely. But in the short run, the question is, so there are two separate perspectives. Fixing GST, I think, is very important for the small businesses to really to survive, because the paperwork burden of it, the complexity of it is, one of the reasons why I think they're getting hit. This is not based on extensive data collection, but when I chat with them, they complain like hell about GST. So I think that's one of the issues. That's a long-term issue. Then there's a question of what do we do to revive demand now? And you might wonder if there are ways in which tax cuts can be used to just get people to buy certain things where we have clear excess capacity. Real estate, we have real excess capacity, and in automotive, we have excess capacity. And that's a different problem, and there you might want to have temporary giveaways to the middle classes. So the one place where I say, where maybe I'm clarifying, that I don't necessarily think that we can get out of this slump entirely without giving some cuts that will benefit the middle classes. Now, that's different from the corporate sector. In the corporate sector, if it gets anything, it should get it through the indirect effects of increased spending. Increased spending is, I think, is one thing that's going to benefit the corporate sector, and that's when the money that they have in their pockets will start coming out. They're going to start investing. You
are among those who's been saying India needs to invest much more in education, much more in health. That's where the government needs to focus on. that's where your spending needs to be. Your schemes need to be better targeted so that they actually benefit those who really need it most. And we haven't invested as much as we should in health and education.
Well, health and education are different. Health, we are among the lowest spenders in the world.
Yes.
Education, we are actually kind of par for our GDP levels. We are more or less, the problem in education is not more spending, but much better spending. I think we kind of spend enormous amounts on salaries and then don't put enough. We don't do enough to get out enough from the teachers. On health, I think Ayushman Bharat is the plan to expand spending. It's a way to. It's not necessarily going to be the biggest improvement in health, but it does protect people's incomes. So it's going to substitute from private spending to public spending, and that I think is a good thing. But I think Ayushman Bharat is. If I had to do something, I would make sure that Ayushman Bharat is working rather than it's just a label. And 10,000 people are taking it up, but another 100 crore are not. That's that particular set of these zombie programs. We have a lot of zombie programs. I think Ayushman Bharat should be a focus.
Let me ask you in conclusion. In the last 6 months, the Prime Minister has spun this idea of a 5 trillion economy by 2024. Is it time to be more realistic? Do you believe that rather than spin dreams, let's focus on the reality as it exists and first resolve the issues? Or do you believe that politicians will always, do you believe that $5 trillion dream in the first instance?
No. I think it's right now, given the state of growth, it's going to be, just the numbers don't look realistic. And the growth we'll need to get to 5 trillion by 2024, it's going to be hard to get there. No, I don't. I think I think aspirations are valuable. I don't think that the Prime Minister is wrong in projecting a sense that we should aspire to big things. Having said that, I think they're also distracting. If you really think that that's where you're going, then maybe you think that we need to try to tighten our belt right now because we're going to become this powerhouse tomorrow. But if you think that that leads to us not recognizing the short-run problem. I think the short-run problem may turn into a long-run problem if we don't solve it. Let's solve the problem now. If the banking sector doesn't revive, there won't be investment. If there's no investment, we're not going to go to 5 trillion. So let's think about what we can do to solve the problems at hand.
Let me therefore ask you in conclusion, when you see around you an element of social chaos, political confrontation, does that lend itself to a healthy ecosystem in which the economy will once again be back on the growth track? If issues like CAA, Article 370, seemingly polarizing, start dominating the headlines, surely social disharmony is not conducive to economic growth. Or are we saying that authoritarianism or this kind of social conflict is isolated from the economic reality?
Look, I think that the social conflict, the first order is that I think we should worry about what the investors are thinking. I mean, the foreign investors. We actually have had, for the first years of Mr. Modi's government, we did very well on foreign investment. And I think the foreign investors will start to worry about stability and also about, their image and all of those things. So I do think that we should be concerned. But having said that, I think that my sense is that reviving the economy will actually move us back towards, I think, something that I think the social conflicts are partly a product of an economy that's tanking also. So I do think that...
That's very interesting. You're saying that some of the protests are in a way linked to anxiety over jobs, anxiety over the economic future.
Absolutely. And conversely, some of the people, the counter protests are also coming from people who feel that, given that the economy is not working well, let's focus on social issues. I think the whole...
It becomes a distraction for some.
Yes.
So net, what you're saying is just focus on the demand issue and start reviving the economy as your top priority?
Absolutely. It has to be absolutely right now. I think I don't typically believe in cycles sort of having a natural sort of feedback mechanisms that can take them out necessarily. So I worry that we can get stuck. Brazil, if you think of Brazil was the world's fastest growing economy, or one of them, between 1960 and 1980. In 1980 it stopped growing, and 20 years it didn't grow. So first they said this was a cyclical, and then they said it's a long cycle, and then it was a very long cycle. And my worry is that we shouldn't, sort of these words like cyclical seem comforting, but they're cyclical if you solve the problem. If you don't solve the problem, they can be chronic.
I think you send a firm message out there, Professor Banerjee. Hopefully, someone in North Block and the PMO's office is listening. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Professor Abhijit Banerjee giving us his sense of what needs to be done to fix the economy. Thanks for watching.